What did you think of that last episode of Loki?
Um, yeah, I mean, across the board, everybody loved it. But I do have some concerns and a few concerns, but not many. I'm not surprised. I was surprised that Kang showed up, but after seeing, well, I'm sorry. Let me rephrase that. I was surprised that Nathaniel Richards showed up. Um, I was surprised by that a little bit. But I do feel good that like last episode in our podcast, we did talk about He Who Remains, the
Yeah,
Citadel
yeah.
at the end of time. We kind of hit on that stuff, so that was good stuff. So I'm
Yeah,
glad.
I mean, I was totally expecting both of those because when you were talking about it, it really sounded like there's no way they could avoid it not being, the castle is the citadel at the end of time, and inside of there is he who remains.
Yeah, yeah. So I mean, the only thing that surprised me was how they conflated all the different iterations of Kang, Nathaniel Richards. So Nathaniel Richards is Kang's real name. I think he's the third. And then we
The
have,
third Kang.
yeah, no, he's the Nathaniel Richards the third.
Oh, okay. Okay.
But we also have He Who Remains, who was not a Kang variant or iteration or whatever. So there's a couple different things going on
So
there.
they're totally separate in the comics, but they
Conflated
made a
them.
compound character in the
Yeah.
MCU.
And they made a compound character of He Who Remains and whatever Kang variation that's coming up. But I think our listeners need to understand that a lot of people on the internet are calling him Kang. Don't be surprised next season if he's not called Kang. I think what they're going to call him is Immortus or something different. I
Hmm.
think they're saving
He had a bunch
Kang.
of different names in this one.
Yeah, well, the thing is, I'm actually reading, and this is something we've talked about before. I'm reading Avengers Forever. I downloaded the digital comic. And Mike, if you're not, you have an iPad, right? You should
Yeah, I do.
download
Mhm.
Avengers Forever and read it. I think you'd really enjoy it.
Okay.
I think it's the kind of comic book that you would enjoy. I think it fills in so many gaps in what's coming into the next season and stuff like that. So, because you have to remember, the TVA doesn't have a lot of comic history behind it. So, they're having to make a lot of this stuff up. The MCU part's making a lot of this stuff up. And they're
Right.
drawing some source material from only a few sources. And I think that, especially with Kang, what's it called? Comic book number? It's not called episodes. Issue. I'm reading issue 9 of Avengers. It's been so long since I read comic. I'm reading issue 9 of Avengers Forever, and it's the issue that gives Kang's entire history, and it fills in so many gaps. And it's actually a lot for us to look forward to if we understand that the show might like hedge a little bit and not give us Kang yet. They might save Kang for Ant-Man, which would make a lot of sense.
Mhm.
So like for example, the He Who Remains, the guy at the end of Loki, he was acting kind of funny because he's really old and he's been doing that for a long, long time. The person like him that looks like him that we'll meet next season will not act like that. He'll act completely different. And I think
Mm.
we're going to see a lot of different versions of this character in different ways. And so and the MCU and Marvel and Disney in particular will get a lot of use out of out of the acting. I think he did a great job.
How do you
Uh,
know he's gonna act completely different? Is that from the comics that you're
from the
pulling
comics,
that?
from the comics. So
So
in the
he
yeah, in
who
in the comics, Kang acts different than Immortus, who acts different than He Who Remains, and so you're going to see a lot of variations of Kang. Like just to put in context, the amount of Lokis you saw in
yeah,
this season, I would not be surprised if we didn't see that many different Kangs. I'm just gonna call him Kang because it's easier for people to understand. But even though it's
okay.
incorrect, I'll just keep saying it. So
Nathaniel
like,
Richards.
yeah, I like saying Nathaniel Richards better. You'll go see a lot of variations of him in a lot of different formats, and it's gonna be fun. Hopefully,
So was it he who remains that had that kind of playful way of speaking?
no, no, no. That's all stuff that the actor and the show brought in. He Who Remains is just a really old dude. Like
Oh,
if you read a
okay.
comic, he's just a really really old dude. And actually, I just read this episode issue, and he was the last director of the TVA. So
Right.
that's comic accurate.
Okay. Yeah, the actor that plays he who remains.
Yeah, he did a good episode. He was in a show called
Lovecraft
yeah.
Country.
People love
which
that
was
show.
great.
I didn't watch it because that's kind
Oh,
of sounds
you should
it sounds
watch it.
scary. What's his
You should
name?
watch it. Huh? His name is Jonathan Majors.
Yeah, he's gonna be a hit. People are going to love him. But there's so many different things that people don't get. Like, I was reading this thing on Twitter, and this guy's like, "Yeah, like right now he looks like this, but soon he's gonna have blue skin." Like Kang doesn't have blue skin; his armor is blue. Like that's a mask. And I'm like, you could just tell people who don't read comic books. It's like I was so frustrated when I saw that. It's like he doesn't have blue skin. It's a mask, dude. I don't know. I need to get over this because if I don't, I'm going to have a heart attack.
You're
So
saying his visor's tinted blue?
No, like if
because doesn't it look like it's a
it's a mask. It's like it's a face mask, but it's like it covers his whole skin, so it's skin
that
tight.
hugs the skin.
Yeah, so it looks like his skin. I can understand if people never read a comic book and think that's Kang's blue. I can understand that, but he's not.
Okay.
And that's a small little thing that I just need to get over. Anyway, what's your questions? What you got for me today?
All right. Maybe before I even get started, maybe I should just ask you.
Yeah.
We've talked about what I think is a plot hole in this episode a few times. And that's evolved, whether it's a plot hole, whether it was the TVA lying. Where do you stand on that now?
What plot hole was that with Sylvie?
It's about Sylvie. Like, how is there and now more versions of Loki?
Mm-hmm.
If we have a sacred timeline, how are there versions of Loki that physically look different from Tom Hiddleston? Because if there's a sacred timeline, Loki can only be born once in that timeline, so it has to look like Tom Hiddleston. Therefore, any variant would also look like Tom Hiddleston.
Well, I think that we need to think about it. It's like, you ever heard this idea? Like, you ever played? That's a card game, and this is gonna make sense to me. It's a card game called Dutch Blitz. Have you ever played it?
I've never even heard of it.
Have you ever played Uno?
I've played Uno.
Okay. Have you ever played any kind of high-speed card game?
I've played Uno.
Okay. Well, Dutch Blitz is a game where you play with 4 people or more, and you have. It's sort of like solitaire, so you have a bunch of cards in front of you that you have to match, but you also have to match cards in the middle of the pile. So you're competing with everybody else in the game to match as many cards as possible. Dutch Blitz is a great game to play it. But a friend of mine who's really good at it, she's awesome at it, she says that you have to have soft eyes, which means you can't...
soft focus.
Soft focus, very good.
Race car drivers do the same thing.
Yeah.
You don't look at the cards in front of you. You have to have a soft focus so you can see everything.
Yeah, and that idea of soft focus, I mean, I do that when you play video games, to be honest with you.
You should do that. Everybody should do that when they're driving, by the way.
Soft focus? Okay, that's good advice. It sounds scary, but that's a good piece of advice. I do this when I play video games. If you play like Destiny 2 or any kind of high-speed PvP game with a lot of stuff going on, when you first pick up the sticks, you're just nervous because you have to shoot this thing in front of you and you don't know what to do. But after a while, you get such a good soft focus that you're not even looking at your gun anymore. You're not looking at any particular individual. You're looking at the whole battle space and you're thinking like 10 steps ahead. I think when it comes to the idea of the variants and Loki and the sacred timeline, you should also have a soft focus on that. Like this, like you can't focus too much on this Loki is an alligator, right? Think more of could this Loki have achieved what he needed to achieve in the timeline, right? And like the idea is the reason why the alligator Loki and the black Loki and the classic Loki, the reason why those people got pruned is because their timelines began to diverge. But
all of the Lokis on, is that even a planet? All of the Lokis in the void can be explained, I guess. Or I think the one that cannot is Sylvie.
Yeah, she could, but she can be explained. Like if a woman Loki could do the same thing as an alligator Loki, right? I mean, the whole purpose of Loki's is to fight Thor and to make Thor lift up and become a hero, right? That's the whole purpose.
Right.
But at some point, Sylvie became more than she was supposed to be, right? And then they had to prune her. So the way I look at the sacred timeline,
how many times have you been born?
I think that's a metaphysical question, Mike. To be honest with you,
yeah, I've been born once.
Okay, but in theory, okay. So which one do you think is the true Loki? It could be the Loki that we understand, but it could be Sylvie. Like
Well, so
who's to say who's true?
I'm back to I think that the showrunners and the writers created a plot hole.
I think. Well, here's what I think, and this is me helping the show out a little bit. Okay, I'm just helping the show out. So Nathaniel Richards' character said something very interesting. He said that he discovered that there are universes on top of his. Right.
Right. Yes.
Okay. So now, do you have any kind of paper in front of you?
No, but I can visualize.
Okay. Can you really?
Yeah, and our listeners can visualize.
Okay.
Too.
Okay. Listeners and Mike, please visualize. I'm holding a notebook right now. Can you hear it? Okay. Now, I'm flat. The notebook is flat. There are pages in the middle, on top, and on the bottom. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Now, each one of these pages are going the same direction and doing the same thing, and they look the same. But they're all individual pages doing the exact same thing. Right. But let's say if I flip through the pages, let's say if one page, the ink's messed up, right? I can't write on it because the pages isn't right. I'm going to tear this page out. That's a variant, right? And so the idea with the sacred timeline, if you looked at the graphic that Disney showed that was surrounding the seal at the end of time, the sacred timeline had these threads in it. So the sacred timeline was a big white like thread, but it had multiple threads in it. So think about it this way, Mike. Think about how like you can have an alligator Loki, you can have a woman Loki, you can have a black Loki, and you have a regular Loki, right? They each going to do the same thing, but if one of them decides to do something different, they are going to cause a variation of the timeline, and they're going to create a multiverse, right? So yes, Sylvie is different than the other Lokis. But
I think we could do a whole like bonus episode of the podcast on just arguing our points on this.
100%. Well, we're doing. There's nothing really else to talk about with this episode. All
right, so here's how you can explain all the Lokis within the void.
Okay. I think I just did.
No.
Okay. All right.
Here's how you can explain all the Lokis within the void. Okay. And this goes back to what He Who Remains was talking about. So he says again. So before this episode, I was like, okay, yeah, there's no plot hole. There never was a multiversal war. That was all a lie by the TVA. However, He Who Remains says that he, in fact, did in the multiversal war and had a sacred timeline. So that's where I say, okay, now there's a plot hole again. However, the way there can be all those different Lokis within the void is because they could have been sent to the void by or as a result of ending the multiversal war. And we all know, what do Lokis do? Lokis survive.
If that makes you feel better, that's a great explanation.
So that's how they could be there.
Sure.
However, Sylvie was supposed
to be there. Sylvie was supposed to be there. She escaped. So if she would have been pruned when she was a girl, she would still be there. She would.
But she would still have to come from the sacred timeline, which means she'd have to look like Tom Hiddleston.
But all the other ones did too, though.
We don't know that.
Okay. All right.
They could have been from before the multiversal war. We don't know that. All right. Anyway, that was all. Like we could probably do an hour and a half or 2 hours just talking about that, I think.
Well, I can hold in my head the idea of two things being the same but different, right? And like, I don't think the universe cares your sexual orientation or gender.
No, I don't either.
If you're supposed to do the same thing, if
within a single timeline, somebody can only be born once.
Well, but my paper metaphor, right? My paper metaphor.
That's multiversal.
I know, but okay, no. Think about it this way: you have a bunch of different timelines that are doing the same thing. So in that reality,
that's a bunch of different timelines. Yeah, I agree with that. If we have multiverses, then no problem.
Yeah, but think of it this way: they all are a bunch of multiverses, right? But if one goes weird, it creates an alternate multiverse and it splits from the thing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but if it's coming off of that, then
I feel you. I don't know if it's a plot hole. It's just like I think it's a overall disagreement of the fundamentals of how multi-universes could work. Like there could be a female version of you. Which one's the whole
absolutely idea, in a multiverse there could be. Yes,
and the whole idea of a sacred timeline's a lie. Like this is the
but within
timeline.
My timeline, you have to be
your timeline.
White guy.
Yeah, in
You have to be a
your
white guy.
timeline. Yeah, in yours, right?
Right.
So, okay,
So
the
you're
idea
saying that Sylvie came from a different timeline than Tom did.
100%.
So she did not come from the sacred timeline, or Tom did not come from the sacred timeline.
No, what I'm saying is that the sacred timeline creates variant timelines, and they can stay under the radar until they get weird. So, for example, the alligator timeline was in the sacred timeline. The black guy was in the sacred timeline. All these different Lokis were in the same timeline, right? But because they got weird, they diverged, and then they got noticed by the TVA. And
that would have to be. They'd have to, like, the timeline would have to diverge while they're an embryo or something for that to happen.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Yeah. Yeah, true.
Anyway.
But the whole thing about the sacred timeline's a lie. There is no sacred timeline. The universe wants to have a multiverse. And
Right.
the He Who Remains artificially manipulated the timeline to create one that he likes, right? One that he prefers.
So maybe he allowed two.
What I'm saying is that it's not
yet.
Yeah.
One was Tom Hiddleston's timeline, the other was Sophie's timeline, and he's like, "All right, I've got Sophie. Let's chop off her timeline." And now we're down to one. I really like this timeline. We're going to stick with that.
What I'm saying is that he's at a monitor and he thinks, okay, I have my sacred timeline. It's perfect, but underneath it's not. You have a lot of different variations being created, and he doesn't notice them until they diverge too much, and he sees them. So I think that the timeline is, I think it by nature in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, and just by the idea of fiction, right, in general, multiverses, the idea of multiple different timelines is natural, and he's artificially controlling it. It's not supposed to be that way, right?
Right.
And so he's looking at a monitor, and then he's like, "Oh wow, a variation. I gotta prune that." But there's all kinds of different variations bubbling under there that he doesn't notice until it happens. Now, this is not. It's not our fault that we're arguing about this. It's the show's fault. But the show could do a better job explaining it. But it would take, like, we've been talking about this for 17 minutes, right? Like, it would take half an episode.
They could explain it pretty quickly, I think. I don't know. So anyway, this was all like leading up to, this was my, not even in my notes, question before I got to my real first question, which is, or not even a question. All right, so at the beginning of this episode, Sylvie says something to Loki.
I know what you're going to say. Go ahead and say it.
You know what I was going to say. All right.
Yeah,
so
she's been doing this longer before he was born.
Before you even existed.
Yep.
What the heck does that mean?
It means that the timeline does not work chronologically correctly. Because, okay, I'm going to blow your mind, okay? What if the timeline is okay, so you know what the infinity symbol looks like, right?
Yeah, we've seen it in the show. It looks like an hourglass on
exactly.
Its side.
So my theory, and this kind of bothered me too, Mike, until I really started thinking about it. What if the sacred timeline resets? So and every this would also explain your variation theory. Every time it resets, it could okay. So let's say the timeline resets, and now we have a completely new timeline. Oh, this is a girl Loki variation. Prune it. New reset. Oh, this one's good. Keep it. New reset. Oh, alligator Loki. Prune it. New reset. Oh, black Loki. Prune it. So what if it's like that? What if it's like secular, where every cycle there's a new universe being created, a new timeline, and the TVA watches it and sees if it's okay or not. If it's not, they prune it. That has to be what they meant, because that is a legitimate plot hole. What she said is a legitimate plot hole, because we thought that all these universes were being created at the same time, right? But no, the variations are happening in different cycles, and it makes sense that
if the timeline ends and recycles, perhaps she's from the sacred timeline cycle before Loki is.
That's the only way it makes sense. That's the only way that makes sense, because we do see that they did say that, hey, we get a bunch of different Lokis, right? If that's true, then that means they have a bunch of different instances where Loki's keep.
But you know what? Born. That still doesn't make sense, because
it does.
Her timeline was pruned, so her timeline got sent to the void.
No, it's like,
So it couldn't have recycled and become Loki's timeline.
Did you watch them when they hit the reset button? Did you watch what they did and how it looked visually?
It looks the same way when you get hit with a baton.
Okay, so if you looked, whenever they hit the reset button and it went off, like let's say the episode where baby Sylvie gets captured and they reset the timeline there, right?
Yeah, right.
Asgard, the total city of Asgard doesn't get destroyed. It's just these little bitty pieces around it. So her little toy boat was destroyed, and a couple of other
Is
things.
that not just what we see before the camera cuts away?
I think that when they hit the reset, they reset the timeline, right? And then they see if another timeline will be created, and if it looks good, no, prune it. If it doesn't work out, prune it. So what if all they do all day is look at new? Like, he wakes up in the morning, like Mobius wakes up in the morning, gets some coffee, and says, "Okay, which timeline is this? This is timeline 2305 of the cycle of 10." And he has to look at 4 or 5 different resets every day, and then all of a sudden he's like, "Oh God, I just prune this one. This is bad. Reset it. All right, let's try again." You know, like what if they're doing it like that? What if their job is to keep the universe cycle going and make sure it's pure? I'm not sure what the end. Like I think even Mobius said this. Mobius said that their jobs was to keep the timeline sacred until he who remains fixes the problem, and then they go to the end of time and just live out. And so like maybe that's their job, but again, they don't explain it. But maybe that's what they're doing, and that kind of solves the plot hole.
Yeah, I don't know. Maybe. I also wonder, did she misspeak when she said pruned?
No, she said prune.
Doesn't pruned mean you get like your body gets zapped?
Yeah, I think what she meant to say is that her timeline was reset, or maybe that she got that was bad. But you know what? It could be different editing problems. Cause like whenever they film a show, they have like 5 or 6 different endings, 5 or 6 different situations, and then the editors just put it together the way they want. So maybe that was a misspeak. That could be a misspeak for us, but it could be something that the script said for her, and they just didn't catch it.
Yeah. All right. I think we've talked enough about that one now. We already hit on in the previous episode. Now we know it's confirmed. We're at the Citadel at the end of time. Anything else you want to tell us about that?
No, I actually felt pretty good about that. I'm actually reading when I was reading Avengers Forever. They did mention what's the name? Aolith?
Aelith, yeah.
They mentioned Aolith. And there's a whole section in Avengers Forever where Kang talks about how he used Aolith and some other different time stuff. So that's actually kind of fun. So that's comic book accurate. I really like the explanation of what Nathaniel Richards said about how it all worked for him and how he was fighting his variations and how he dealt with all that kind of stuff. I really like that. I thought it was very clean and very smart. But
one thing that he says is that he created all.
Create all of what? Everything?
He just says, I created all. I control all.
Yeah, I mean, in his mind, he did. He does. He does create all. He does destroy. I mean, he wiped the timeline. He used Aolith to clean out all the other timelines, which in the comics, Aolith also does, by the way.
Then we talked about that before. Yeah. Aolith actually can branch from one timeline to another and consume it.
Yeah, and that cleaned out the timeline the way he wants it. And then he created TVA, which probably took thousands of years to fully fix. Then he has a nice clean timeline that they make sure he stays clean, and he's in the background just watching it, making sure it works. So in his mind, yeah, he does. I mean, it's crazy because in the Avengers Forever book, one of the Avengers says these people are gods. How can we fight a god? And like someone tells her they're not gods. They have technology that you don't have, right? And so it's interesting how Sylvie and Loki also kind of did that. Like he doesn't have superpowers. He just has technology. And then once they got access to the technology, he was vulnerable. And I mean, he's not God. He was stabbed to death, right? And so I think the question is now. My question is, what happened from the moment that Sylvie killed Nathaniel Richards, he who remains, to when Loki shows up at the TVA and then meets Mobius and says, "Hey, we gotta prepare for Kang or whatever," and he's like, "Well, who are you?" Like something happened, and I think what happened is like, someone showed up to the Citadel at the end of time and started doing some manipulation. I don't know. That's going to be what episode. That's going to be what season 2 talks about is the taking over the TVA and who did it. And I don't think it's Kang. Kang's a conqueror. He's not going to be a bureaucrat. He's not going to be in charge of the TVA. He's going to try to conquer timelines. And so again, it probably isn't him. It's probably Immortus, but we'll just have to wait and see.
Okay. Miss Minutes tells them that he who remains is willing to insert both of them back into the timeline so they can
Yep.
be together.
Yep.
Got anything to say about that? That seems
Um,
weird.
that would have been the classic Marvel Comics answer. In the Marvel Comics, it is not uncommon for a multi-universe, like one universe, to be melded with another universe, so those characters can interact. That happens all the time. There's
Hmm.
multiple different universes. Like this to blow your mind, Franklin Richards, who is the son of Reed and Sue Richards, at one point created a pocket universe, a little small mini universe to hold his family in
Hmm.
until he could figure out a way to get them out. And that pocket universe stayed that way. And then at some point, someone leaves that pocket universe and comes to the Marvel 616 universe and meets them. And she's like, "Hi, you created me." And he's like, "Ooh, this is weird." He's like, "Yeah, I don't really know what to say about that." It's a really funny moment. But like, I think a lot of fans would have been fine or anticipated the idea that we can bring Sylvie into the Marvel Cinematic Universe, and now we have Sylvie, and yay, and everyone's gonna be fun and happy.
Right.
But I'm glad the show didn't do that. I'm glad the show instead it's going to keep them doing what they're doing, because what they're doing is working. The episode Loki, the show is working very well. All the actors are working very well. The show's dynamic works very well. They have a new mystery to solve. The mystery's interesting. The villain seems interesting. So I'm glad they didn't do what I thought they could have done, and what I anticipated them to do. I'm glad they didn't do it.
Right. Okay.
Why'd you say it was weird? Are you having a hard time with the idea of like two exact people being in existence at the same time? I think it's like
No, I mean
really
they've been
bothering
doing
you.
that through the whole show.
I know, but
There's nothing wrong with that.
it wouldn't be weird if Sylvie is in like the Marvel Cinematic
No, I
Universe
just thought
hanging
it
out
was
with them.
weird that he was willing to, or they said he was willing to do that. Like, why would?
I think he knew that he was vulnerable. I think he knew that he could be killed, and that's why he was scared.
Hmm, I don't know. It's interesting. I thought it was weird,
Mm,
and maybe it was just I don't know. Maybe it was just them adding a little bit of flavor to the episode.
maybe.
Really, maybe they just wanted to have a reason for Miss Minutes to show up again.
I didn't think it was that weird. I thought it was like bargaining. It made sense that he would bargain with them. You know.
Yeah, but he brought them there. Why would he bargain with them?
Well, because I don't know. If I was him,
He
I'd
paved the
bargain.
way for them to get there. They just walked on the path.
I think he's lying about that. I think he's lying about that. I think that's a lie. I
Do you
don't think
think
he did
the
that.
pages he had was a parlor trick?
I think that he wanted them to think that so he could get his way. But do remember, he acted completely different when they met the threshold. He says, "This is the place where I don't know what's going to happen."
Right, yeah, his demeanor completely
Yeah, and so
changed.
I think what he wanted to do was to get them to leave him alone before that happened, and then when it happened, he was like, "Well, I'm screwed now." Like it's like like if I controlled all of time and space, and then I realized that there was going to be a certain point where I was going to be with two people who wanted to kill me, but I couldn't
Mhm.
predict it, I'd be afraid too. I'd be terrified. You know.
Okay. Well, what
Um,
do you think the threshold is then?
I don't know. That's a really good question. I don't know. I don't know exactly. I mean, from a writing standpoint, it's probably just something convenient to make the story keep moving. But
It
from a
was a really interesting, um, sequence, I guess. The sound went kinda weird.
yeah, you could hear a
His
little like boom kind of sound.
Yeah,
Yeah, it was.
his personality completely changed.
Yeah, I'm not
We
sure.
see some kind of a timeline outside the castle that starts, diverging.
Maybe what happened was that while they were in there, the timelines diverged so much that he wasn't able to control it anymore. I don't know. I thought the graphic that showed the timelines diverge was beautiful. I thought they did an excellent job showing the timeline spread like spider webs. It was really fantastic. They did such a great job. And I mean, shout out to the graphics department and the people who created the sets and everything for the show. They just did a tremendous job.
I think the threshold is why when Loki was sent back to the TVA by Sylvie, he wound up in a different universe.
Yeah, that could be. That could be. And again, we don't really know. exactly how. I mean, we don't know what the show's going to do, but it's interesting how Mobius says, "Hey, who are you?" He doesn't recognize what Loki looks like, which could be that could be a lot of different implications.
Right.
That could be scary too. So,
Yeah, he thinks he's an analyst that works at the TVA because he's wearing their outfits.
yeah, but somebody at Mobius should be able to recognize an Asgardian, like villain, when he sees him.
Well, I mean, yeah, if he'd seen Loki before, he'd recognize his face.
So if he doesn't know, is Asgard still there? Is the Marvel Cinematic Universe destroyed in this version? I don't know.
Right. And we see a statue of Nathaniel Richards in the TVA at that point.
Thank you for saying that. Thank you. Don't call him Kang. Yes.
And we see that the costume that he's wearing in that statue looks a lot like Kang, right?
It does. It's very similar.
Okay.
But it does look a little Egyptian. And be aware that next season you might see a little Egyptian stuff because Kang, the first time that he time travels, he goes to Egypt and he rules Egypt for quite a bit of time.
Oh man, I hope so.
Yeah, so
he does Stargate.
Yeah, so it's going to be a little bit of Stargate stuff.
Yeah, throw some Egyptian stuff in here. I'll eat it up.
There's so much to if it is Kang, there's so much to it. I mean, there's a thing called the Council of Kangs. In the Avengers Forever, he talks about different divergence of himself. At one point, there's like the original Kang actually goes to a timeline that was created by a divergent of himself, kills his divergent, and takes the timeline for himself. It's really complicated. And like Ravonna Renslayer is also a big part of Avengers Forever too. Not a big part, but she's talked about as well. So yeah, we're going to see more Renslayer. We're going to see more Mobius. We're going to see more TVA. We're definitely going to see a lot more Kang. Next season is going to be the Kang show, if it is Kang. We don't know, but it's going to be Nathaniel Richards all over the place. So be prepared for that.
What do you think Miss Minutes showed Renslayer? Speaking of Renslayer.
Really good question. I don't know. But I do think that whatever she showed Renslayer is the reason why everything came up. Nathaniel Richards came up Kang. Like, I think she did something. Because Renslayer is romantically connected to Kang in the comics. So I think that she's probably doing something with Kang or something like that, or Immortus or someone.
Yeah, he who remains wanted Miss Minutes to show her that.
Yeah, so it could be a lot. So what I think happened was, here's just my theory. He who remains knows he was going to die. He gave Renslayer something that she could use to give to a variant of himself, and that variant could take over the TVA. So to be honest, he might be dead.
Would have to be in another timeline.
Yeah, but we did see variations already starting to be created. So maybe what Immortus, whatever Nathaniel Richards wanted to do, maybe he knew that he was about to die, but he still wanted to have some kind of control, and so that he does get that. I mean, nothing changes at the end of the episode, right? We still have a TVA. They're still doing prunings and stuff. So, I don't know.
This TVA's got idols of him.
Yeah, just like we had for the Timekeepers. Yeah,
right. Renslayer says she's going in search of free will. Does that ring any bells for you?
No, it could be anything. I don't know.
Okay.
I'm really surprised that I would have loved it if the show had statues of her at the end. That would have been awesome. Like, that would have been way more interesting than having statues of Nathaniel Richards. I think so. That would have been cool.
Why do you think so?
Because it's something different. Like, I think as a comic book reader, seeing Nathaniel Richards' likeness there, that's cool. And everybody's like, oh, it's Kang, he's coming, right? All right. But seeing her would be like, oh my gosh, now she's in charge of everything? That would have been cool. It would have been completely different than we would have expected. So we'll have to wait. Just gotta wait.
All right. He who remains says he was a scientist on Earth.
Yeah, accurate.
What kind of a scientist?
I don't know,
just a generic scientist.
In the comics, the century where Nathaniel Richards was, his great grandfather.
31st century is what he says in the show.
in the 31st century, it's war torn. Like everything's a disaster, and Nathaniel Richards the first fixes everything, cleans everything up, and Nathaniel Richards the third, which is the one that we see, kind of like is like it's like a paradise. So I don't know. There's some kind of super scientist person.
Okay. Is there any significance to he who remains eating an apple in the episode?
No,
Okay.
I wish there was.
Just a cool thing to do. All right. What's an early movie that Brad Pitt was in? Oh, you know what? It's Ocean's 11. I think it's Ocean's 11. In Ocean's 11, in every scene, Brad Pitt is eating something.
Yeah, it's great.
Yeah.
It's a whole bit. It's funny. Yeah,
Right.
it's really funny.
So that's kind of, what that eating an apple makes me think of.
Yeah, just from if you're watching a show, it's more interesting to see someone do something than to sit there and talk. You know?
What else do you want to tell us?
That's it, really. There's nothing really else to tell us. I want people to be very careful of all the speculation, because a lot of people are saying that it's definitely Kang. We don't know that for sure. I'm very surprised that we don't hear Immortus' name more in like a lot of theory crafting from people. But it could at the end of Avengers Forever, the Immortus is very prominent figure. So I'm thinking, here's my theory, that in season 2 of Loki is going to be Immortus, and he's going to be like the variation of Nathaniel Richards that takes over the TVA, and that's going to be a big deal. But I think that I think they're going to save Kang for Ant-Man. They're going to save the big reveal of Kang the Conqueror for Ant-Man. I just think that's what they're going to do.
Do you know, is it the same actor?
Yeah, it's the same actor.
Okay.
So I mean, I think that I think Marvel's doing something really interesting right now. They did the same thing. If you look at the trajectory right now, they did the same thing for Avengers Infinity War and Avengers Endgame, which is all their properties were aiming towards these last 2 movies. So every movie that came out had some kind of tie-in for these last 2 movies. And so I think what they're doing now is building that same trajectory. Like we're building up to another big Avengers Infinity War Endgame type deal, but it's going to take time to build. So we're
Do
not.
you know when we're supposed to get the next Ant-Man?
Oh, it's not even. Not even. It's be like 2023. It's not even booked for 2022 yet. Like he's not even out there yet.
Okay.
So it's going to be.
So we'll definitely get the next series of Loki before that movie.
I think so. Yes. So I think that I mean, if you look at Black Widow, the end of the post-credit scenes of Black Widow tied to the Hawkeye season shows coming up, all these shows are going to slowly interact with each other. So to make you do a couple different things. One, of course, see the movies and get Disney Plus subscriptions, but also I think the MCU is concerned that people can't keep all this stuff straight. So if all these shows interact with each other, interlock with each other, then it makes a lot more sense to them. So we just have to wait and see. But I think that some people watching Loki are missing some of the point of the show. It's not about us trying to figure out this like puzzle. It's about enjoying it. And so I just thoroughly, just from a person watching a TV show, I thought Loki was a great show. I thought it was fantastic. I really got to love these characters. I'm invested now. I want to see what happens to them. And so I know this is a podcast dedicated to connecting the comic lore piece to the shows and the movies. But I don't want to forget that this is just objectively, it's just a great show. I think it definitely is holding its own, and I think it's worth everybody to watch. It's just fun. It's a fun, well-directed, well-thought-out piece of television.
Yeah, it's well written, except for that plot hole.
Except for the plot hole only bothers you.
Yeah.
It doesn't bother me.
Gotta bother other people too.
It bothers some. You could go on YouTube. Go on YouTube and type in Loki plot hole, and have a blast. Just
have a good time. I'm gonna have to do that. I'm gonna have to do that this weekend.
Are you serious about that, or are you joking?
I might actually do that.
Okay.
All right. So the end credits scene, that's some way to announce your next season of the show.
Yeah, it's yeah. I mean, it was surprising to me. I didn't think they'd do it. But it's great. I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah. What do you think's gonna where do we go from here? What are they going to do?
My theory about Immortus being a big bad is a thing. I think that the trajectory of the show, if you look at,
So you think in the next series we get Immortus,
yes,
and then later on we get Kang.
yes, but more importantly, we need to think about the trajectory of Loki himself. In the first season, who is Loki? Is he just a villain? And it turns out no, Loki can be more. And now I don't think that he's going to exist. I think next season people are going to be like, "Who are you?" Like he's going to have to deal with the fact that he doesn't exist. Like who he is has been erased from the timeline. So I think the season Loki season 2 will have us interact with a Marvel Cinematic Universe that is changed completely. Like I don't think we're going to all the stuff we know about all the different movies and stuff we've watched will just wash away, and it's going to be something totally different. And I think his job is to fix it. So I think that's what he'll be trying to do.
Do you think Sylvie and Loki will ever be friends again?
Well, they did smooch. You saw they smooched.
Yeah, I saw that.
Some smooching. How'd you feel about the smooching? I think it bothered you.
That didn't bother me.
Okay. Because they're the same people. That's what I'm trying to say.
Right. I mean, it's a fictional story. Yeah, it's okay.
Yeah, totally. They're going to be together again. Oh, yeah. What's the point? Yeah, he's going to try to find where she is.
Yeah, but she, she was fighting with Loki. She sent him away.
She could have killed him. She didn't.
Yeah.
She could have killed him and then killed.
But they were supposed to rule the TVA together.
That was never.
That was He Who Remains' idea.
Yeah, but that was never their plan. I don't think. I mean,
that's. Well, I guess no. Her plan was to kill the guy.
We have two different philosophical. It's two different philosophical debates happening at the same time. Do you believe in fate or do you believe in free will? And I think Sylvie believes in free will, and Loki believes in fate. And so you can't. Those two things don't work together. You can't have free will and fate at the same time, right? We try to do that in our lives, but it doesn't work that way. And so I think that fight was is like, what happens when you get free will, and it looks like chaos, So just
right.
wait.
So Sylvie kills Nathaniel Richards. What do you think she does? Does she try to take over, or does she?
No idea. None. No idea. We'll have to. That's going to be the big question. Where's Sylvie?
Right.
And I like the fact that the show is addressed. The show is doing something really good. The first season had a bunch of questions. They answered those questions, but then the second season has new questions, and so that's going to be the premise of the show. Here's some questions. I hope we figure them out. Keep watching.
Any other closing thoughts?
Read Avengers Everybody who's listening to this, you can get Comicsology is an app. It's owned by Amazon. So if you have an Amazon account, you can get Comicsology and get comics, right? I paid $10 for it. It's 12 issues, not episodes. And it will bring up you will see so many things that you saw in Loki. You'll see it in the comic, and it'll answer all your questions. So before if you're a YouTuber or some kind of influencer and you want to give people your theory about Kang, read Avengers Forever first. I literally read it in 2 hours. I know children can't do that because they just don't have the attention span, but just read it, right? And then give me your theory about what's going to happen, because it's going to change. Because Avengers Forever, we said at the very beginning, I'm saying it now, it's a fundamental comic tied to this series. Definitely read it if you want to understand what's going to happen, what could happen.
Okay, we're going to have to put that in the show notes.
And also, you should read it, Mike.
Yeah, maybe.
Find some. Could your wife read it?
I don't know. I haven't asked her yet.
Okay.
I don't need to ask her because she'll hear this and then,
Mike's wife, if you're listening to this and you want to read Avengers Forever and we have a special episode with you, me, and Mike to talk about it, I would love that.
Yeah. All right. I want to talk to the listener real quick.
Okay.
Listener, are you listening to us on Apple Podcasts? If you are, please give us a rating and a review on there. It would really help. And if you're listening to us on anything else, does it have ratings? Does it have reviews? Do it there too. Did you know that we're on YouTube? You can subscribe to our YouTube channel. What else should our listeners do? Jarvis.
Tweet us. Send us some tweets.
Yeah.
Yes, lots of tweets. Tweet at me specifically. Start a tweet fight with me. I would love that. I would absolutely 100% love that.
You're at JAYSLACKS.
That's me, Jay Slacks. For some reason, I don't worry about my job and my Twitter account. Should I?
I don't know.
Where can they find you, Mike?
I am on Twitter at MIKBRE. The show is on Twitter at Super Sideshow. That account tweets out a interesting tidbit once a day. So there's not a whole lot of annoying tweets coming out of that account. Give it a follow. It's a pretty interesting feed to read.
Yes.
Yep.
What's our next show?
Our next show is Avengers Age of Ultron.
Woo! Another hot one. Oh, I can't wait. You will have so many questions. I cannot wait to answer.
Are you going to rewatch it, or are you just going to go off the top of your head?
I just watched it a month ago, so I'm good.
Okay, yeah, you're good then.
But yeah, this is what I do. I watch an episode way before, so I can actually think. There's so much about Avengers Age of Ultron that connects to the show, to comics, and doesn't. So we'll talk more about it. Lots more about it.